Today on RPG Horror Stories, we have a bit of a murder hobo who killed a major quest NPC for no reason, stole loot from other players, and generally acted like a complete dick while controlling and speedrunning through his DM's campaign. Without further ado, let's get started. I had just started a campaign with the group I usually play with. One of the members of that group is one of the worst D&D players I have ever played with. At the time, we had no idea, as it was just his second time playing with us. There were, of course, some red flags when we first played with him though. His character made no effort to interact with NPCs and would even interject when players were conversing with NPCs to get them to go faster. Whenever his character was bored, which was whenever we went longer than 5 minutes without combat, his character would start doing just random things. An example my DM brings up to this day is him trying to build a jetpack while the rest of the party was receiving a quest briefing. At the end of every combat and quest, he would claim as much of the loot as possible. Yeah, one of those players. Even weapons he lacked proficiencies in and refused to share. At one point, our DM had even designed a weapon specifically for a character, which tied in with their backstory. This player promptly stole that weapon and refused to give it back, to the DM's shock and horror. Despite all that, the other players and the DM managed to pick up some slack, and by the end of the campaign, we all agreed it went rather well. So when the next campaign rolled around and we thought, well, he might be annoying, but it's not like he derailed the story, and after all, it was his first campaign, maybe he just needs to improve as a role player. Looking back, we were really wrong. So we begin our next campaign, which was meant to take place entirely underground. We began the first session descending down into our DM's homebrew variant of the Underdark on a pulley-based elevator. The elevator suddenly gets stuck and stops halfway down. The first conflict the DM would throw at us. Before anyone in the group can even speak, the problem player starts hitting the elevator with his large-sized, strength of 20 character, whom I shall, from this point, refer to as Greg, the Eldritch Abomination. Greg asks to break the platform. The rest of the party, previously freaking out, calms down a bit. Our DM chuckles. Sure, he could make the check, but it's incredibly unlikely that he succeeds. Greg rolls. To the DM and the party's horror, Greg scores a natural 20 on his first roll of the campaign. The DC was 25 and the strength modifier was 5, so we start falling. The elevator, at the time of it stopping, was, according to the DM, half a mile off the ground. At our party's level, below level 3, well, Greg had essentially killed the party by fall damage. Now, our DM doesn't particularly care for raw or rye, so long as his players have fun and they tell an engaging story. So our DM is merciful and waives the fall damage rules to avoid a TPK in the first hour of the campaign. If I was the DM, I just would have told him that the fall damage would kill the whole party, but given this player's behavior, I don't think he'd listen anyway. After that catastrophe, we arrived in the starting town where we met the first plot hook our DM would throw our way. This plot hook, an NPC, is supposed to set us on the trail of the main story. Of course, the BBEG's henchmen show up and start tearing apart the town, trying to find the NPC so they can kill him. We're low-level players and we stand no chance in a fight against him, so we hide. Now, this villain was a pyromaniac, according to our DM, so in order to flush out the NPC, and by extent the party, he started burning down the town. At this point, the quest NPC is trying to escape the city through the sewers and urging the party to follow. We, of course, have yet to ask this NPC anything, so we're following to ask him what the hell is happening. It's at this point Greg has an idea. Greg, using all his brain power to come up with this master plan, grabs and nearly strangles the quest NPC. Greg then, without talking to the rest of the party, launches the quest NPC at the villain. The villain then proceeds to slaughter him, gloat for a moment, and teleport away. So thanks Greg, the town was destroyed, its people slaughtered, and our only plot hook was gone. Greg, of course, saw nothing wrong with this, as he just started pilfering the valuables of the townsfolk from the ruins of the burned out town. For 10 minutes, Greg ran from building to building, asking the DM if there was any good loot. Lots of gold, magic items, whatever. Each time our DM, more and more demoralized, would point out that common townsfolk would have no reason to possess either. At this point, I and the DM just got up to get a drink, and settled down for what would be our worst D&D campaign yet. Session 2 came next, and it was at this point that the DM made the worst mistake they have ever made in any campaign I've ever played with them. To be fair, he had it planned since before the first session, but he would have changed his mind after witnessing the mess that Greg made last session. Being a large map, most areas of the world would only be accessible by vehicle, so beginning the second session, the party obtained access to a flying train that would enable travel from town to town and between areas more quickly than otherwise possible. However, the DM didn't want the party to get a vehicle from nowhere, so he decided to tie it into the backstory of one of the players. Of course, every character had a motive to be here, or a goal to complete, or something to tie us to the main plot. Well, every character except Greg. After the campaign ended, the DM showed me his backstory, and I would frankly hesitate to call it a backstory or even writing in general. So the DM thought to tie the train to Greg's backstory as a way to give him a motive to stick with the party and the main quest, which we had failed to start, and as a result were currently drifting aimlessly, and to drive Greg to be more interested in RP moments. He even gave the train a golem pilot so that Greg would have an NPC he knew, because there was nothing of the sort in his backstory. We traveled to the next town in Greg's new train, and the session ended there. Not a great session, but not horrible either. Buckle up, because here's where things start to get awful. For session 3, we had arrived at a town built into a giant stalactite, meaning air travel was the only way to get in and out of the city. You might already begin to see the issue. The town was to be our hub for the next few sessions, we thought at least. The town was plastered with quest leads, quest boards, quests from NPCs like shopkeepers and bartenders and priests, quests picked up from letters. Hell, the DM literally dropped a quest prompt on our heads when someone dropped a stolen diamond on a party member's head from a city's rooftop. Of course, the DM put the main story quest amongst all these quests, and of course, lacking all faith in the party at this point, our DM put the quest in the most obvious place, with the innkeeper. Naturally, me and other 2 party members go to speak to the innkeeper. While talking to him, a mysterious man arrives to speak with our captain, which would be Greg. Our DM says that Iran, the mysterious man, was my last olive branch towards Greg and trying to include him into the story. So the quest NPC goes to talk with him about the details of the main quest. Once me and the other party members finished talking with the barkeep and enjoying the tavern, we decided to head out to explore the rooftops, which we heard were overrun by a criminal syndicate. On the way out, we ran into Greg, who informed us that the man had asked him to help retrieve an artifact from a certain location far away from the city. Me and the other party members were like, I'm sure the artifact can wait, we're going to explore the upper part of the city first. And this idiot responds, well, I'm leaving in 10 minutes. If you're not on the train by then, I'm leaving you and the other PCs behind. At this point, the DM gets up for another drink. By the end of the night, all of us, except Greg, will be doing this every 5 minutes or so. Because we would be stuck in the city without him, we had no choice. In trying to tie the problem player to the party, our DM had accidentally tied the entire party to Greg, and we had no choice but to go at his pace. And his pace was charging at breakneck speed from plot point to plot point, never talking to an NPC longer than it takes for them to tell us where to go next. I could describe in painstaking detail our next and last session with Greg, but I'll give you just some highlights. Greg jumped into a portal we stumbled across with no consideration because, and I quote, it's clearly where the DM wants us to go, so why bother arguing with it? Greg did not do dungeons, If plot progress was contingent on a dungeon, he would either sit in the train and wait for party members and or NPCs to do the heavy lifting, or he would come up with a harebrained scheme, like ramming the train into the dungeon to progress. Greg would start fights with non-hostile characters, sometimes even story-relevant characters in order to get loot, often to the entire detriment of the party. One time, he engaged in combat with a group of constructs that the DM would later say were meant to function as merchants for the party to trade with. In a last-ditch effort to slow us down, the DM threw us into prison. Rather than do anything helpful to escape, Greg just kept punching the wall until he could break out. This was while his party members were getting disappeared into torture chambers. Eventually, because of Greg's propensity for only caring about loot and stealing loot from other players, the DM began to lock loot to be player-specific, to avoid repeats of Greg stealing things meant for other players. Greg threw an absolute fit at this and tried to destroy backstory-based loot that our DM gave to other players. At one point, the party came into possession of a whole bunch of assorted potions. Greg claimed them for himself and wouldn't allow anyone else to use them. If they did, he would charge them with exorbitant amounts of gold. We're talking about tens of thousands per potion. And if they didn't pay, he would try to attack his other party members. By the end of that session, I was pulling my hair out, and I could see that our DM was too. Afterwards, we spoke, and he apparently had planned ahead and written 6 sessions worth of content, and Greg had just speed-ran through them in all one session. After that, we never had a session of that campaign again, partially due to Greg, partially due to another player stalking my DM. Okay. Anyway, although Greg would continue on as a member of our group until we unanimously agreed to drop him late last year. Okay, so let's just address the thing in the story that I think is the main problem. Yes, obviously it's Greg. Greg is causing all these issues, but further than that, it's the DM's inability to say no. I'm aware in Dungeons & Dragons there's a common saying that DMs should never say no. They should always say yes, but instead. However, I completely disagree with that. There is power and importance in saying no. Now, of course, I need to address the fact that DM can't say no to everything, because that results in railroading, when DMs overdo the use of no and don't allow their players to have any choice at all. That is a completely different problem entirely. However, never saying no in your campaign will result in a couple problems, with this being some of the worst. This post is titled, "The DM accidentally allows a problem player to control the campaign," which is connected to the DM giving this player, Greg, control over the magic train. However, the DM actually gave Greg control way before that. The moment the DM stopped telling Greg no is when Greg took control. No, you can't break the platform and kill the whole party. No, you can't skip past all the roleplay that the players are doing. No, you can't steal other players' items for the fun of it. I could go on and on and on. Now, I don't want to imply that the DM or the players are the problem here. Obviously, the problem is Greg. Greg is the issue. However, we need to take action to stop players like this. And I understand that there are interpersonal conflicts, pre-existing friendships, stuff like that, that make dealing with a problem player more difficult. If they're your friend, it can be hard to tell them no. But for the sake of your games, players like this cannot be allowed to continue in a campaign. It can absolutely ruin a game. This is selfish playing. I mean, it's the definition of it. Stealing loot, skipping past other players' roleplay, etc. That is selfish playing. That's a person who doesn't care about the fun that their friends are having. They just care about their own fun, their own adventure, speed running through the entire campaign instead of taking the time to savor what the DM has built and to experience the story along with their friends. In conclusion, learn the power of no, even if it is hard to say. With that, we are going to wrap it up for today. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more episodes of RPG Horror Stories, as well as my other series, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern for more. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.